if Shakespeare actually, as a young man, traveled as a spy for the Queen, one of Burleigh's intelligencers, and spent time with Dee, spent time in Prague at the court of Rudolph II, then all the mysteries of Shakespeare's work vanish like players at the end of a play. It goes away. He, of course, would have learned all of his occultism and all of his higher science, higher awarenesses from Dee. He would have learned all about court etiquette and politics and intrigue from the court of Rudolph II. He would even have made the connection with Elsinore and Hamlet from the political point of view, from the connection with Tycho Brahe. So all of the problems with where did Shakespeare get his information just vanish. And the kicker is that one of Shakespeare's most, how shall we say, dense plays, King Lear, has its origin in the megalithic history of Prague. The tradition is that the Celtic king of Prague, one King Croc, had 3 daughters who were all witches. And King Croc wanted to retire and work on his druidic studies, so he passed the kingdom over to his daughters. And the eldest 2 daughters made bad marriages and had quite a bit of problems. You can just read it in King Lear. And the third one, who became Cordelia, was a princess named Libussa. And Libussa had an experience at the ancient megalithic site in Prague in which she saw a vision of a great golden city arising within the 7 hills of Prague. And Libussa is considered to be the founder of Prague because of her vision of the golden city. If you overlay King Lear and you overlay the legends of King Croc and his daughters, the parallels are immediate, obvious, and stunning. So not only do we have a Francis Garland that we can't contradict by saying, oh, he wasn't Shakespeare because Shakespeare was here, and we say Garland's here. There is no contradiction there. Shakespeare and Garland always are in different places. If we have dates for Shakespeare, we have corresponding dates for Garland that do not overlap. We know, for instance, that Shakespeare registered his first work in 1593. 2 weeks before, he registered Venus and Adonis, which is a masterful tantric alchemical poem. He was visiting, Francis Garland was visiting John Dee at Mortlake. And this happened several times in the early 1590s. It's as if Garland was taking his works to Dee to get approval before he had them published under his real name. We actually have a poem written by Edward Kelly, and you'll notice that it's dedicated to his good friend G.S. Now, on Shakespeare's birth record in Avon, he's not William Shakespeare, he's Guillaume Shakespeare. So anywhere on the continent, anywhere outside of England, William was Guillaume. And we even have some contemporary references to Shakespeare as G.S. or Guillaume Shakespeare from 1600, 1601, from an Italian fellow who actually saw some of the plays. So if you were going to refer to good old Will outside of England, he would have been Guillaume or G.S. Now, if you study this poem is a how-to document on how to do alchemical theater, just what Shakespeare produced subsequent to this instruction by Kelly. So we have this sort of level of documentation that Guillaume Shakespeare was the especial good friend of Edward Kelly. Now, Kelly and Dyer and Shakespeare traveled to check on Dee and Kelly, and the very first thing Kelly did as soon as they arrived, knowing they were spies and knowing who they were spying for, is that Kelly took them down to the basement of the castle and produced a real, authentic alchemical transmutation right in front of them. December 19th, 1586. And Kelly, being the clever person that he was, he gave the crucible to Dyer to take back to Burleigh. And if you know anything about alchemy and faking alchemy, the crucible is key, because if you just simply have some gold in the bottom of your crucible covered by a false bottom, that's going to show up when you examine the crucible. So the crucible proved that Kelly had really performed a transmutation. Dyer took this back to England. Burleigh and the Queen were so excited that they immediately sent Dyer back to become Kelly's student and or to spy on him and see if he could steal the secret. So all these links bring us around to this situation right about the same time as the Spanish Armada, in which there's a group of people in Prague around Dee and Kelly, and they're all spying for the Queen, they're all spying for Philip II, they're all spying for Rudolph, they're all spying for the Catholic Church. In those days, it wasn't enough to be a spy for one power. To really make it work, you had to be a spy for everybody. And so you have this teeming circle of espionage swirling around the fact that the Protestant world was about to end. And if you know your history, the Spanish Armada was a close-run thing, and it was only broken up by a somewhat magical storm that didn't allow the Armada to land and pick up soldiers in Holland, and completely destroyed it as they crossed around Scotland and left all these Spanish sailors adrift on the beaches of Scotland and Ireland and so forth. So if you think about what the spies in Prague were doing, they were trying to counterbalance this rising force of really quite nasty Catholicism from Philip II. The Inquisition, Philip II, in addition to loving to grab paintings and store them away in his private quarters, was quite a fan of the auto de fe, the mass burning of heretics and so forth. Rudolph II spent his early adulthood, teenage years at the court of Philip II, and unlike his brother Matthias, who thought this was a really good idea, Rudolph came back to Prague absolutely aghast at what the supposed Christian church had been doing. And Rudolph's goal was to completely circumvent the Catholic Church, to actually create a new Hermetic Rome in Prague. Since Rome has 7 hills, Prague has 7 hills, the idea was that we were going to restart the whole idea of spirituality, politics, etc., on an entirely new basis. Now, it's not really Rudolph's fault that it didn't succeed. I don't think anyone in the late 16th century could have pulled it off, but good old Rudolph gave it an excellent try. Now, most of the angelic workings that Dee and Kelly did, most of the transmissions of this language and this information, happened in and around Prague. And as I said, the Enochian language is a completely new language, but it's a real language. It has its own internal structure, grammar, syntax, and it's translatable, and it's actually a language that you can take a step forward and create new invocations. You can actually write things in Enochian. So it's a real language. Several things happened in Dee and Kelly's experience. Kelly, being a hothead, one of Rudolph II's couriers mentioned the fact that he had the top of his ears cut off for forgery, and that he had a very bad reputation. And again, Kelly, being very hot-headed, he challenged the man to a duel and killed him against the direct prohibition of Rudolph II, who had forbade dueling. So this sort of broke the bubble of good feeling, so to speak. And Dee went back to England, and eventually the emperor forgave Kelly, gave him his own house right below the castle in Prague, and set up his alchemical laboratory. Kelly produced many more transmutations in front of almost anybody who wanted to come watch. But unfortunately, Kelly wouldn't tell Rudolph the secret. Kelly, again, being a rather disputatious and ornery fellow, believed that no one human being, particularly the ruler of a large empire, should have that much power. So Rudolph got very upset, and he put Kelly